Everyone, happy Wednesday. Welcome to Manufacturing Hub. A little bit of different show here. If you guys are new here, we'll go kind of talk about what we're up to. On this one, we're going to focus a little bit on the theme recap and going and maybe sharing a little bit of our experiences on training and learning. Maybe we'll go talk some of Vlad's experiences when it comes to that. But first and foremost, the major thing that we're going to do is talk about the ProveIt Conference, which is next week in Dallas. If you guys are going to be there, let us know. I've had a number of messages come in already. We've got lunches set up and all those other things. So if you guys are going to be there, want to say hi, please feel free to go drop me a message on LinkedIn or shoot me an email or a text or any of those things, depending upon how we normally chat. Let me know that you're going to come. We'll go find some time to go ahead and hang out. Beyond that, Vlad and I have a podcast booth that we're going to be in, I think, every afternoon is the current plan. We've got several super fun conversations set up. And then we've got hopefully more conversations that we're going to get set up over the course of the next, I suppose, week or so. If you guys are going to be there, drop us a line, let us know what you want to chat about. We'll see if we can go fit you into the schedule. If you guys aren't going to be there, because I think the capacity is somewhere between 600 and 700 this year, no worries. Vlad and I will have a bunch of these conversations coming out to you probably starting in March. We'll go bring those conversations similar like we've done to the ICC, similar like we've done to several other shows last year and in previous years. Without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. My name is Dave Griffith. This guy over here is Vlad Romanov. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you guys are new here, especially if you're listening live and in person, please feel free to go drop a comment, say hi, let us know where you're listening from, all of those other fun things. If you're going to prove it, let us know. Or if not, or maybe both, tell us who you're most excited to go ahead and see. I think it's going to be I'm very excited. I think we're going to see some really fun, interesting solutions. I think we're going to go see some people that definitely set themselves apart from others in that group. It's very infrequently that we've got almost 3 dozen groups who are going to go there and kind of compete for at least the hearts and minds of the people there and in person at the show. So I'm super excited for that to go ahead and see. So again, if you guys are going to be there, drop us a line, let us know what's going on. Um, if you guys have no idea what we're talking about, don't worry. So Prove It is the mind child of Walker Reynolds and Zack Scriven, 4.0 solutions. If you guys have been following them, you know the concept that has been like 5-ish years old, 6-ish years old, maybe a little bit longer, about unified namespace. The goal of the Prove It conference is to go through the process of actually proving, one, that you know what the unified namespace is, and two, that you can build it, and I suppose three, to some extent, how you or your solution, especially if you are not an integrator, go and fit in with everything that we are seeing on display. Yeah, so I'm super excited for that. Vlad's got some keynotes and comments coming up about it, but I think for me, I think it'll be most interesting to see all of the people, right? So for me, my favorite part about these shows and conferences are the people that come, especially the ones that we don't generally get to see in person. Last week, Mark O'Donovan message that he was going to be there. He was watching the show that we had with Zack. If you guys want to know more, go check out episode 195. But he was messaged that he was going to be there. I have not met Mark in person. I think Vlad has when he was over in Ireland, but I have not met Mark in person, and he's been on the show. So there are a bunch of people who I have not met before or have not seen in person in a long time who are going to be there. And so I'm excited to see all of the fun characters that this show brings out. Vlad, you said you had some key thoughts on the conference.
Yeah, I'd say, look, to your point, I think the people are a given. I think it's a good opportunity to reconnect with a lot of different groups and people who are, attendees, not just sponsors at the conference. But ultimately, for me, and I watched I guess, the discussion that both Walker and Zach had a couple of hours before this. And I think it's important to highlight a couple of thoughts about the conference. So for me, I think people don't always realize what it takes to build such an architecture, and not only to build it, but also build it in a virtual environment, right? Because at the end of the day, all of the sponsors need to be connecting to a if you call it a UNS, if you call it a data lake or historian, but ultimately they need to be able to connect to a pool of data that is dynamic, right? They're not just pulling a spreadsheet and analyzing what's there. They're ultimately connecting to data that is I guess changing. So the architecture to create that is going to be super interesting to see. They're all connecting to the same exact architecture, so I'm really curious how that's going to play out. I would also say, based on some of the comments that they've made, I had a thought, which is the fact that the OEMs, and they've obviously not mentioned anyone in particular, but I feel that the OEMs and the solution providers, in certain instances, because of our industry, unlike traditional software, are sometimes removed from the problems that the actual end users or customers are facing, right? And so the comment either Walker or Zach had made was the fact that some of the OEMs or sponsors have made the comment that the data is not clean, or it's not as easy to connect to the architecture that they've built than they would have expected, right? And my comment was,
Mhm.
well, in real life, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be as you would expect. And there's a lot of curveballs that you should expect in a real environment. So to me, it brought that thought that sometimes, maybe we're disconnected to the point that the integrator is doing the work and they're seeing those problems, but they're not always
Mhm.
bringing back those insights to the solution providers. The last comment, that I do want to make is I'm excited and I guess somewhat curious how this is going to be orchestrated simultaneously, right? Because again,
Mhm.
I've been on projects where I need to think because there's two other vendors on the same project pulling from the same data, whether that's from the PLCs or database, whatever that may be, and it's extremely complex to make sure everybody's updated, understands how to pull the data, what the update
Mhm.
rates are, and doesn't step on each other's toes, so to speak. And I think that in this instance, obviously, I would assume everyone has been briefed, but I could also
Mhm.
see how if someone starts knocking on that UNS data lake or servers or network, it could
Mhm.
potentially bring down the architecture for some of the other vendors, right? So I'm curious to see how those interactions will actually play out. And to be honest with you, and I don't know if there's any instances like that, but it would be really cool to see vendors create a solution that involve other vendors as well, right? So to use
Mhm.
an example, right, if a PLC from Opto 22 is pushing data into this UNS, well then
Yeah.
a vendor that's doing visualization could be potentially consuming that data and providing a visual, right? And I don't know if we're going to see that, but I think that would be an interesting point into the multi-vendor deployments, because ultimately, and I think Dave and I made this point before, when you have a community conference for a single
Mhm.
vendor or just a very specific booth of a vendor, you rarely get to see what you'll truly find in a factory, which is a multi-vendor, I think, environment in a lot of those instances.
Absolutely. And if I can just go add to that, Vlad, you said that you've worked at factories or at facilities that multiple vendors all had to figure out a way to play nice. I've worked at facilities where one vendor who was the prime took down their own infrastructure because they were doing things that were outside of norms, right? We'll be nice. We'll say that it was
Yeah.
outside of norms, and one of their people made a decision and just took down the entire infrastructure for hopefully just 90 seconds when it took to reboot, but sometimes days. So I know Zach had told us a little bit last week that over the last handful of weeks, there have been significant infrastructure upgrades, and that's not particularly surprising, right? I think it'll be interesting, and I don't know how much behind the scenes we'll get, but I would love to know where they started infrastructure wise versus where we ended up infrastructure wise and why they had to go make those decisions. I think that in and of itself would be super revealing. And I think it would honestly be helpful for anyone who's trying to go build a UNS or build a large system with all of these vendors from scratch. Again, I don't know how much behind the scenes we'll get, or perhaps how much of the behind the scenes that we'll be able to share. I think that's super interesting. And then to your previous comment about the clean data and everything else, it'll be very interesting to see. Again, I don't know how much we'll see of the raw data, right? It'll be interesting to see if vendors are going through some sort of cleaning or normalization process in order to go ahead and get into their systems that maybe not them internally, but a third party solutions provider would typically do. I think that'll be interesting. I have read through most, if not all, of the ProveIt kind of overviews and outlines that have been published, talking about the solution and why they're doing the solutions. And I think it is very normal that we're going to see many of these providers leverage other solutions partners. I think a lot of them internally, I think a lot of the solutions partners internally within the ProveIt conference, but I know that I've seen at least a handful of other solutions providers, especially when we come to systems integrators. And when you and I go through some of these, we've got a bucket that I wanted to go talk about systems integrators kind of as a whole without going and calling out any of them in particular, because I think that they have a very unique opportunity to go highlight a full stack of all of the best solutions presented in the best way possible.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. And I guess for the listeners, right, since we didn't really kind of explain what we're going to be doing at this point, right, is we have a diagram that we have currently living in the mirror board that we've used a while ago on one of the episodes. And ultimately, we're going to give some of our comments based on, the different vendors, what you can expect out of them, coming from a standpoint of, you don't really understand maybe their solution, what their offer is, and ultimately are looking to understand maybe a little bit better what to expect at the conference. And I think Dave and I will also give some of our feedback, maybe what we would like to see, but ultimately, how does this fit into the stack? And so, what you should be seeing in front of you. So, this is the traditional automation stack. Again, the focus here, obviously, at the conference is more of the UNS and being able to connect to all of these elements separately. I think that it's still important to understand that maybe in the traditional factories, the data flow is not necessarily going to be to UNS. So what we're going to discuss is maybe how some of these vendors are showcasing how they can help bring in the data to UNS, maybe clean the data for the UNS, maybe they tie into a very specific stack in this automation layer. So ultimately, like I said, we're going to go down through the list in no specific order, but a little bit based on what they're listed on the sponsors of the community conference, of the ProveIt website. So I'm going to go to that as well if you want to follow along, and if you're interested in looking at these sponsors, you can go into the sponsor section and obviously scroll down. So we're not going to cover all of them because that would probably take 4+ hours. But let's get into the first one on our list, Dave. That's going to be Dell. If you want to start us off with what their solution looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am personally super excited to see both Dell and Google, the both the title sponsors. My understanding is they've come in and provided a ton of infrastructure. And I'll make the comment before anyone gets super angry in the comments. I added infrastructure down the left-hand side of your normal ISA Purdue model. Mostly because one, how important it is in all of our real lives, but two, how important it's going to be when we talk about the infrastructure as it comes to being able to go run this project that we are going to go see next week. So I think most people who know Dell for their infrastructure, right? They know them for their servers, they know them for their other clients, they know them for all of that. I personally, I've seen Dell over at some large shows over in Europe, and I've talked to a number of their people. They have what they call their native edge platform, which I think is either very similar or part of like what Litmus Edge has. And so that is to go through the process of kind of collecting all of that data at the edge. So we've got a bit of specific information. One, we talk about Dell. We have it for some of them. We don't have it for all of the vendors, but Dell wants to specifically feature their native edge platform. They talk about leveraging zero touch deployment, real time orchestration, and automated blueprint management. Native Edge brings unprecedented efficiency and simplicity to edge operations. They've got a couple of bullet points that I'll go hit before we talk about their session highlights. We talk about scalable deployment, which includes their orchestrator tool, ITOT integration, compliant with ISA 95 standards. I talk about security with FIDO, device on board, and supporting air gapped environments. And then they talk about full stack management. So their ProveIt session is going to be, quote, deploy a complete solution. And I'm going to go read this for everyone, especially our listeners on podcast form, because I think it's interesting, right? When we talk about a UNS, it gets more and more complex the more you get into it. But deploy a complete solution. Using Native Edge, Dell will provision rugged servers and gateways in the virtual factory in real time. This will include software solutions such as Litmus Edge for IIoT data management and Ignition for SCADA and HMI interfaces. Two, they're going to showcase unified namespace integration. So the data processed through Litmus Edge will flow into the unified namespace, providing synchronized factory-wide visibility. And three, they're going to highlight industry use cases such as predictive maintenance, quality optimization, and OEE tracking. They go into a little bit of some additional specifics, but for me, I'm super excited what this looks like, because this conceptually is, we're going to go kick off by showing you everything, right? In theory, if you want to go build a unified namespace, you could take most of what Dell's going to have and what the infrastructure looks like and go ahead and leverage it in that way. So for me, I think it's really interesting. I can't imagine how much time and money Dell has spent to get there, to go set up all of these things and on their demo. So I think it's super interesting. And I will be interested to see if this is a continuation of the big highlights that we've seen from some of the European shows into some of the American shows, because that in and of itself is particularly interesting for me.
Yeah. I think, like, look, for me, the general comments based on, your lengthy description, I would say, is ultimately, it seems to me like Dell is playing at the SCADA to ERP layers, right? Whether that's hosting different solutions, whether that's providing infrastructure to host those solutions. Ultimately, I think they can host a number of applications. It's not
Mhm.
extremely clear to me if they're the ones who are the providers of those apps or they're a marketplace to deploy those applications. But ultimately, I guess the diagram that I've drawn is, there obviously will connect to the field PLCs through HMIs and PLCs, but they'll also connect to the cloud. And often, that's what an edge or on-prem solution is used for. So to me, maybe this is the most accurate representation of what they're going to be showing, or what I would expect to see them to show at the conference next week would be. Any adjustments or thoughts?
I would probably add the sensors and field devices as potential inputs, right? Anything that's not going into the PLCs or HMI. My understanding of the Native Edge platform and the Litmus Edge platform is those will go connect up and down the entire stack. Yeah, those will go connect up and down the entire stack. And so it wouldn't surprise me to see hooks kind of in and amongst the majority of these layers, or one could put hooks in and amongst the majority of these layers, but that is generally what I'm expecting of, we're pulling data in from our lower levels on our Native Edge platform, and we're serving it up to the cloud, we're serving it into the UNS, and then we're probably coming back down. And we could almost build an entire additional stack of all of the other services. Like we talked about predictive maintenance, we talked about kind of a variety of other things, as we will show coming up. But but yes, I imagine that we'll see a lot. And again, it's so much. I feel like that's one of those we're going to have to be there to see, like, what do they mean on predictive maintenance. I think Vlad, I think you and I actually have a roughly outlined 4 theme episode just on maintenance and modern maintenance practices, and we could go through the process of spending a month just talking about that topic. So it'll be very interesting to see what they have.
Yeah, I guess moving on to Google, because I think that pretty much sums up Dell pretty well. Again, I'm curious to see what they will be showing, because to me, Dell has always been a server slash IPC slash like edge solution, but more on the hardware
Mhm.
side. So we'll see what they have to offer. I'm going to copy this over and maybe start us on the Google side, right? And I'm going to place this a little bit over Dell, or I guess like higher up on Dell, not because it is a better company, but because it is operating predominantly in the cloud, right? So we all hopefully know by now that Google is one of the cloud providers, including in the manufacturing space. So I hope that they will be bringing, and they have applications for specifically manufacturers in the cloud. I kept this box, I guess, the same size because a lot of times when you're talking about cloud,
Mhm.
you're talking about hosting the ERP and the MES layers for the manufacturer in the cloud. I have not seen personally SCADA, like actual controls of lines in the cloud. I think there's ways to do it. I think you can do some very basic stuff, and you obviously connect to a SCADA, but to control equipment is still, I think, in the future. So I'm going to just type this in. I know that Google also has a consulting practice. So to be honest with you, I'm not sure if you have some insights as to what they're going to maybe present or unveil. I know they also have a ton of partners when it comes to these apps. So I'm not sure if it's going to be a pure cloud infrastructure conversation, or there's going to be a lot more to Google than that.
Yeah, so and I don't have any inside information beyond I know Google is a title infrastructure partner. I think they're coming and providing a bunch of these services. They have kind of a major setup as well in there. From what I know of Google Cloud or GCP, Google Cloud Platform, and what I can expect. I know that they have kind of an edge manager, an edge system to go ahead and connect to those sensors, field devices, PLC, and kind of all of that layer. So I fully expect to go see them pulling in raw information from I fully expect to see them pulling in raw information from our sensors and field devices, and then from that point, going and dishing up that information. I don't know if we're going to go dish that into a SCADA. I don't know which partner they would be leveraging to do that. I would not be surprised to go through the process of seeing them showcasing a bunch of their other partners or a bunch of their other applications. So, like a predictive would not surprise me. Them hosting a MES, a SCADA, or something else would not surprise me. Maybe we have a local instance and a cloud hosted instance for redundant backup. And then beyond that, I imagine that, or I would hope that we're going to go see them pull a bunch of this raw information from the UNS, and we're going to go leverage that into some advanced analytics, right? And if we want to call it machine learning, if we want to call it artificial intelligence, kind of depending upon what that looks like. I'm hoping that we see them go leverage the cloud aspect for that. For everyone, and I know Peter is, I think you're in Australia, Peter. I know Odoo is in Nigeria. So for anyone who is not based in the US, Google Cloud is like a distant third behind AWS and Azure, and it depends probably where you're at and at what point we're looking as to if AWS or Azure is kind of one or two. That they are fairly close. From my perspective, Google Cloud is a distant third for a variety of reasons, and because of that, I think it'll be interesting for them to go showcase their products and see if they can't pick up some additional enterprise cloud opportunities with what they're building.
I just want to clarify, what do you mean by they'll connect to the sensors and field devices? Because to me, the cloud provider should definitely not be operating at those layers unless they're doing something
So they have edge management. They have a edge management package. At
right.
least as recently as last year, the last time I saw them, they have an edge manager, right? And at the shows and other things that I've seen them, they have this great display in which they literally have like LEDs sucking the information out of your edge level devices, your PLCs. I'd again imagine that they could get to the sensors and field devices. So I think
Mm.
similar to what we've seen with Dell, we'll see all of these major organizations have the ability to go touch the data at the edge. And I don't know how many of the other organizations we'll see there who offer that, but I would imagine all of your AWSs, all of your Azures, all of your GCPs, all of your Dells, all of your Nokias, all of your major organizations that are doubling down and focusing on on manufacturing, on the industrial, have realized that they need to leverage something to go through the process of pulling the data out. Because if they wait for third or fourth party service providers to go do that, they're just going to dead stop, right? If you were a Fortune 50 CEO, Vlad, and I was playing golf with you and I'm trying to go hammer out a deal, and I'm GCP or Dell in this instance, I imagine that you would feel much more comfortable with me saying, yes, Vlad, we can go pull the information from your edge devices, from your plant side devices, all the way to um, all the way into our platform. We can regurgitate that. We can do our artificial intelligence on that, and we can provide valuable support and solutions on that. I imagine when Google and all of those big companies started to get into that, what, 4 or 5 years ago, they realized fairly early on that they needed to go provide that solution.
I think that maybe we need to set some ground rules for this diagram a little bit better, because I think just like, again, like if you mention a Dell server, it can run the entire stack, right? It can pull data from everything, but it's important to draw a line as to where that vendor truly operates. My understanding is that Google doesn't have native apps that would be used to pull some of those devices, but of course, because they're a cloud and edge monitor, you could do pretty much anything you'd like. Just a like a Linux box could live
Oh, cool.
anywhere. So I think we should, like, again, my understanding is we should not say that Google is going to be pulling direct data, but of course they have apps that can do that.
Perfect. So I in fact went on Google to confirm that it was public knowledge and I could say it. So Google has what they call Manufacturing Connect, and it's their factory edge platform co-developed with Litmus. And I know Google and the Google folks and the GCP folks from the work and the conversations that I've done with the Litmus group. So I know for a fact that it's the
Yeah.
Litmus or some flavor of the Litmus Edge Manager that is the Google Manufacturing Connect solution, which is how I know they can go pull data from those edge cases.
Yeah, so I guess once we get to Litmus, let's make sure we capture that, right? Because it's not a Google native application to me.
I mean, it's a Google application. Um, Google owns that, Google sells that. So I don't know how more native you want than that. If we want to go talk about that, then we probably have to remove native edge platform from Dell, because I don't know if Dell has built that entirely themselves. I think it's kind of one and the same. At some point, it becomes a bit convoluted when groups are leveraging other pieces technology.
Yeah, I guess I'm not entirely clear on who owns the native edge platform, right? I think that, again, this goes back to the comment that to me, Dell is primarily a hardware solutions provider, which allows you to build different applications on top of that. Who owns the platforms? I'm not entirely sure. And the same goes for Google, right? Primarily, it is a cloud provider that can help you get to the lower layers through other applications, but ultimately, their main value proposition is being able to pull that data into the cloud, transform the data, and ultimately drive insights, right? It is not um, like in their wheelhouse, but it is possible to connect to some of those like lower end devices. But we'll see. We'll see what the demos look like. For sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to go move the conversation slightly off of the infrastructure, the Dell and the GCP, and I want to talk a little bit about integrators. I don't want to talk about any integrator in particular because I don't want to put any of them specifically on the spot, but I feel like this is a wild opportunity for an integrator to go show the entire stack, right? Like you can show the best of the best. If there was ever an opportunity to go rebuild your demo solution to be within the UNS architecture, and to go put hundreds or thousands of eyeballs on your solution, um, this is it. So I feel like I've talked a lot for both Dell and GCP. Vlad, what are your thoughts, especially with your integrator background, on that?
Yeah, so as you said, I think integrators can span the entire stack, right? This is the reason why I drew this massive box, and they can come in at various degrees, I want to say, of knowledge at each one of those layers, right? So there's going to be integrators that focus entirely on automation, which is going to be PLCs and HMIs. There's going to be integrators that focus on the SCADA and MES layer, and that could be, again, naming the vendors. That could be your Ignition, that could be your Tatsoft, that could be your AVEVAs, right? There's going to be a lot of different solutions at that layer. ERP, I would say, is almost an entirely different animal of itself, right? An ERP for the entire business is going to be, I wouldn't say even an automation integrator, that could be a business solution provider. And ultimately, cloud, I think UNS and anything that touches data is its own breed again of integrators. So I think this is a large box. I'm curious to see what the integrators will bring to the conference, but speaking in very general terms, right, what I would
Mhm.
like to see is I want to see real world applications coming from integrators more on the controls and fairly, to be honest with you, like data transformation layers, right? I'm curious to see if data is being pumped into or produced by the UNS in this instance virtually, right? How are they handling that data? Are they using off the shelf tools some of the sponsors are providing, or are they building out their own solution in, Python, JavaScript, C++, whatever else? How are they transforming that data? Are they just feeding raw messages from the UNS onto a dashboard, or are they doing some sort of filtering? Are they allowing the user to filter? Are they creating reports that allow me to see data, for example, by shift, by week, by month? So that's going to be more of your sort of like MES feature. Are they pushing the data to the UNS in form of when to start and stop a certain asset? Again, obviously, without knowing all the tag structures, I would assume that is possible. What kind of layouts they're creating for that data, and ultimately, again, like going back to maybe some of these hardware and software solutions, what do they recommend? Right. So
Mhm.
once you're connecting to the UNS, once you're connecting to the stack, we both know that there's going to be certain limitations in terms of hardware. Not every vendor is able to pull even today MQTT messages. So maybe they're using some kind of an edge solution to, go OPC UA or go MQTT to OPC UA, or showing transformations of different protocols. Similarly, I would hope to see again, I don't want to say old school industrial automation equipment, right? But some integrate Modbus in there, right? Or even
Okay.
throw in like a vision system, right? Because we, quite honestly, and this is maybe another comment for the ProveIt conference, we don't have vendors of robotics,
Mhm.
we don't have vendors of vision systems. I think they play an interesting
Yeah.
role in industrial automation. So maybe the integrators are doing something interesting in this instance. But overall, like I said, I would think that they're going to play at the SCADA and MES layers more than anything else when looking at this specific
Okay.
stack uh, in the context of this conference.
Let me ask you two questions on that, Vlad. One, because I know you watched the most recent stream where they were talking about infrastructure. Is there the ability, or do old school Modbus serial or like old vision systems, do they exist within the current architecture for them to put it in there? Or are you kind of hoping that someone slaps a couple of, I don't know, 20-year-old, 25-year-old Rockwell and or Gen 1 Cognex vision cameras on their demo area to be able to go push that live and let people go see that? Like, it, do you know if it exists within the architecture, or are you kind of hoping people add it?
Well, so the architecture is not going to have it, right? But
Okay.
there's a few thoughts there. So number one, you could, for example, if you tie in a Cognex camera on your demo, you could be passing data from that Cognex camera from your like PLC or edge device into the UNS, right? It could be taking measurements of, let's say, samples of product, right? What you'd see in a normal production line. So, for example, I don't know, I have this 3D printed fidget spinner here, right? Like, which is a mechanical part. The vision system could be
Hmm.
measuring what's the diameter across this widget, and it could be feeding that into the UNS, which then runs a statistical analysis either in the cloud or on-prem via an algorithm, and then spits out what's the standard deviation of those parts, right? So I guess what I would like to see is maybe other maybe hardware and or software. So similarly, because again, I think the point is, what I would like to see more than anything else is that the current integrators that or the current end users that I'm working with are not all able to just feed data or consume data from a MQTT based broker, right? So I think they also need a push or help from the integrators to see how can they maybe convert some of these legacy protocols, how can they leverage the UNS without necessarily having to modernize the entire stack, which is obviously a solution, but I think there should be other alternatives. Like, I guess my point is, I think integrators need to be very cognizant about the end users and showcase some
Hmm.
solutions that I guess the current customers of theirs or in general are struggling with. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Let me go ask you the follow-up question. And I don't know how much you've considered this, so this may be slightly putting you on the spot. But if you were a systems integrator, you had 16 weeks, an unlimited budget, and a spot at the conference, what would you as Vlad build?
So that is a good question, right? So again, based on my experience, like I said, I would probably recreate some sort of a maybe small cell environment, either virtually or via like an HMI or SCADA platform. And I would pull in, first of all, some of the data that we're seeing at the UNS. I would create nice screens that would display that factory on my screens. And then I would, like I said, showcase some different, first of all, transformations of that data, because I certainly worked on a lot of
Okay.
applications where, again, you need to know how to work with analog, especially level data. You need to be able to transform that at the
Hmm.
edge or by the integrator before you funnel that into the cloud. Number two,
Hmm.
nice UI for like reporting and I guess understanding the opportunities of the factory. So again, if there's errors being generated, if something's out of bounds, I want to have a nice presentation of what that looks like. And then, of course, showcasing some, like I said, legacy or hardware that is not necessarily going to be at this conference by any other vendors, right? Like I said, and I've named a couple of them. You
Hmm.
can see them, some of them on my wall. You don't have vision systems, so I would try to showcase for an end user what it would take to push data from the device to the UNS. What would it take for a Modbus device to be fed into the UNS? I think that showcases a lot of the
Hmm.
skill sets of the integrator by doing so.
Absolutely. I think it's an interesting question. I think from my perspective, I would probably go one of two ways, right? Like if I'm an integrator and I have a solution and it is my tech stack that I do all of the time, and I've got IP within that, right? Like if I've got a framework, if I've built out all of this other stuff, if I have dozen customers who are going to show up to the conference and see it, I want to go blow out and show out kind of my best and brightest, right? I want to go show all of that. And I think that's honestly what we're going to see a lot of all of the cherry picked best applications, because again, it's a significant investment. You want to go show the best. I think similar to what you're saying, the opposite is we go pull out some old, like, I don't know, Rockwell V20 or Siemens TIA Portal 14 or 16 or something old, right? Like a decade old. And we go build that as our solution. And like the concept is, hey, we can go take your legacy systems as they sit with 8 or 10 year old obsolete hardware and software, and we can go do our magic. We can go overlay and manipulate the
Mhm.
data how we need to, without causing hundreds of thousands or more dollars of hardware upgrades before we start, right? So I think that there is an interesting opportunity. I imagine that we're going to see more of the first, kind of to your point, what you were talking about, Vlad. I imagine we're going to see more of the first. The couple of overviews that I've seen on quote unquote integrators are big integrators who are going to show their entire tech stack, or kind of smaller. I would almost call them more solution providers than integrators, but I think they're listed kind of as integrators, and they're going to go show kind of their solutions, bespoke or otherwise. So I think it'll be interesting. Again, I think that almost exclusively the integrator group has an opportunity to go showcase and showcase the best and brightest. It'll also be interesting to see who is showing up at the conference,
Yep.
especially on the end user side. Like if we've got a bunch of end users who are hardcore nerdy engineers, we want to show them our hardcore nerdy data manipulation, old school Cognex or old school vision cameras, and how that goes and connects, and how we can pull in serial and Modbus applications. But I think a lot of them, or I imagine that we'll find several or more than several executives who are looking to know more about UNS, and that's really the opportunity to go discuss with them at that level.
Yeah, and I think you're right. But like I said, at the end of the day, I think that for them it's going to be a journey to migrate to the UNS, right? It's not going to be a one fell swoop. And I think I would trust an integrator that can show me, they can move me along that journey in a way that makes financial sense, in addition to just knowing the higher levels of the tech stack, right? So hopefully we get a showcase of that as well. What do we have next on the
Agreed.
list? We have Siemens slash Aviva, right? And I guess
Yeah, I want to talk a bit about legacy providers. I have put this on the list. So, Vlad, I'm going to kind of introduce a bit of the concept of legacy providers,
sure.
and then you can pick if you would like to be the sacrificial lamb, or if you would like me to be the sacrificial lamb talking about the legacy
I
providers. But for me, uh,
I was
you
gonna
go
say I'm
ahead.
not sure why they're labeled as legacy providers, but I'll let you unpack, I guess, that for our listeners.
Perfect. So as we go look at the software and solutions vendors that we see, I think we see a lot of the, and we'll talk about it. We'll see the litmuses, we'll see the high bytes, we will see the hive MQs. We'll go see the inductives and the Tatsofts and a bunch of other groups like that that are some number of years old, right? Probably under 20, under 25 years old as organizations. And while the majority of people who have heard of them will probably be at this conference, like there are people that you will go talk to who don't know some of these software solutions, or will go find them. I consider like the Siemens, the AVEVA, which is like the old Schneider, the Rockwell, who to my understanding won't be there. Like I consider those guys legacy providers because they do everything, and they have done everything for longer than many of us have been alive. And so that is why I would go call those guys legacy providers. So for me, it'll be really interesting. I've read a brief synopsis of both of them, had a couple of conversations with some of their internal teams. But for me, I think it'll be interesting to see them hopefully showcase the next generation of solutions, or maybe the newest generation of solutions that they have going on. On the Siemens side, I know, what did I see? There's some information up. So on the Siemens side, I know that we will see WinCCOA, which is one of my old favorites. So WinCC Open Architecture, my understanding is the ETM folks, the group who made it over in Europe, will be there, which will be interesting. I'm not sure if I've seen or talked to those guys in several years. We'll see some industrial edge computing. We'll see that integrated into UNS connectivity. We will see, I believe, the industrial information hub and the industrial edge marketplace. That group will be there. I'm not particularly seeing that. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but I'll be interested to see what they come up with. I've had several conversations on the Siemens side, and so it's interesting to go get their thoughts and comments on the unified namespace and how that is transitioning. My understanding is it's more of their American customers, North South American customers, who are driving the concept of a unified namespace, and a significantly smaller portion of their European customers who are going through the process of driving that. But it'll be interesting to see how all of that works together in a unified namespace. In previous conversations that I've had with those groups, it has been, hey, like, you guys are really close to a solution that we would call a unified namespace. Are you familiar with a unified namespace? And sometimes it's yes, and sometimes 20 minutes and a whiteboard into this is the concept of a unified namespace. Do you see how similar it is to the thing that you guys have built or are building and have drawn out? So for me, it'll be interesting to see those guys as they build it. And then I know their solutions, and more certainly than the current AVEVA solutions. I've played around a bit with the AVEVA in the past. The AVEVA is going to have on-prem hybrid cloud-enabled solutions. They're going to have cloud-based AVEVA Connect solutions. They've got the system platform, the AVEVA Historian. They've got reports. They've got HMIs. They call it an Operations Management Interface, OMI, a single pane of glass. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. So that'll be, I fully expect from those guys to see an entire stack of solutions, right? Like we make PLCs, we make or have specific vendors on the sensor field devices side. We make SCADAs, we make MESs, and then we I think both of them have cloud solutions. So from my perspective, I certainly see them going and showcasing the entirety of the tech stack. I think it's personally really interesting to see what that's going to look like, because they have the potential to go rebrand, right? Like, they might not be the old school automation companies, and it's the potential to go rebrand and have at least everyone at the conference go start and looking them and the light of less legacy providers, more leading the way providers.
It's an interesting thought. Not sure I would still label them as legacy providers, but I guess it's interesting how you put it. Um, I guess I'll let you kind of fiddle.
Well, what would you label them? What would you label them, Vlad?
Well, I guess first, I think like Siemens touches a ton of different solutions, so I wouldn't even like bundle Siemens together with AVEVA. I think to me, Siemens plays at every layer of the stack except perhaps, well, it's not even true. They have sensors, they have VFDs, so that would be field devices. I would not call
Mhm.
Siemens legacy. I would call them, I guess, a solution provider in a general sense. I think Aviva
Okay.
plays more, at the SCADA, but predominantly like MES and cloud layers. So I would say that they offer, again, they're very different in my mind. They're very different companies for that specific reason. And I think, from my understanding, Siemens is going to be predominantly showcasing the WinCC OA solution that they're building, but I could be wrong. Maybe they will be showcasing the entire stack. Maybe they'll be bringing, their PLCs, HMIs, SCADA all the way to the cloud. Again, this is Siemens we're talking about. They have everything from trains to um, programming licenses that you can use on the cloud. So I think it's very important to delineate maybe what we'll see when it comes to the UNS. I think you and I both know that they have PLCs that are capable of talking MQTT. So again, my point is I would see them being able to do all of it. But what I think they will try to highlight is this entire WinCC OA solution, which to me is primarily data visualization, data processing, maybe driving some insights from that specific data above all else. I'm not sure if they will be, again, using other solutions, but that's what I would expect them to get done at the very least. When it comes to Aviva, again, I'm not entirely familiar with what they're going to focus on post, I guess, acquisition, merger, or what that looks like. So I'm curious to see what they will bring. But I would expect, again, they're playing at the MES to cloud layer in this specific instance.
I mean, like system platform is your HMI and SCADA layer. So they will bring an HMI and SCADA layer. Absolutely. I mean, so AVEVA owns Schneider, or Schneider owns
Right.
AVEVA. I don't know which way it goes. And so they have an entire line of PLCs. So they certainly play from the PLC level on up. They have an entire stack of solutions. As to what they're presenting or what they've got going on, I don't know. I do know they'll have their on prem solutions and they'll have a cloud based series of solutions. Uh, and so beyond that, it will be interesting to see the way that both of those significantly larger organizations go and present themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've not personally used Aviva HMIs, and I'm looking at their, I guess, screen that explains the value proposition. And to me, it looks like more of a, again, it's similar to what you'd see on a web client. And maybe
Okay.
that's exactly what they're trying to show, but it doesn't seem to me like it's a, like an operational HMI, right? It's not a panel view where it's not a kind of Siemens on machine HMI. But again, like I said, I don't have too much experience with what they have to offer, so I'm definitely going to be taking a look. And it looks like they have an unlimited HMI pricing that you can try and maybe see. So, yeah, it
So
could be
I would
interesting. Like I
say
said,
a Viva system platform is going to be similar to Siemens WinCCOA, right? The
mm,
COA package is your HMization through SCADA, maybe through MES. The is also similar to that, or your your factory talk site edition, right? Like
mhm,
it is going to be one of those things. They are going to not necessarily be one for one comparisons, but they will fill similar roles. My understanding is similar to Siemens having a variety of platforms like OA. Aviva has a number of platforms like System Platform that can go play with that. Again, I have not spent enough time, like a decade of my life, in either of their ecosystems to speak to it with 100% confidence. I know more of the Siemens packages than I know of the Aviva packages. I have worked on a couple of system platform packages in the past. Are you okay if we move on from that, Vlad?
let's do it. I can do the next introduction, I
Perfect. So
suppose.
go for it.
All right. So next on the list, we have inductive automation that's going to be presenting together with CirrusLink slash on a different booth or a different vendor, Tatsoft. So I think those solutions are going to be extremely interesting, right? So Dave and I have both been to the ICC. I know you do a lot of work on the ignition side. We've ultimately, I think, have revealed all the information that we've at least gathered around Ignition 8.3. So I would expect to see a lot more of that. I've had some, I guess, information about them revealing even more stuff, and obviously as the launch progresses, and ultimately on the Tatsoft side, we will be having some conversations with some of their leadership during the show as well. So I'm curious to see what they both have to offer. It to me, again, inductive automation and Tatsoft can both be used as low as the HMI layer. But to me, as Vlad, predominantly, again, I think I've rarely seen an instance where they will not be immediately a SCADA and MES and an ERP, right? So I think, again, it's important to read maybe the descriptions that they give, but then also look at what the real scenario is. And I think both of them have an offer where you can buy it's Ignition Edge and probably a license on the Tatsoft side where it's a smaller price for a standalone machine or HMI. But ultimately, again, my experience would maybe place them at a slightly higher layer, which is SCADA, MES, ERP, and then obviously both of them have offerings either on their own or through partners, and of course with the cloud providers as well on the cloud. My, I guess, expectations for the conference. I think I've seen many demos of SCADA solutions, MES solutions, ERP solutions. I would really like for them to bring something a little bit innovative, right? And what do I mean by that is I think when I said integrators should be looking at just building out the SCADA and MES layers to demonstrate the data, I would hope that the providers of the SCADA and MES solutions could demonstrate something where data is transformed via a more complex algorithm, right? So I'd be looking to see if they can, again, drive some insights and not just display, let's say, the error codes, but maybe demonstrate what's the occurrence of those codes. What can I do as a manager of a line or a facility to go one step beyond just seeing the information that is fed from the UNS. I really hope that they utilize some of their solution partners, right? So we have Cirrus Link, which ultimately allows connectivity, but I think it's important to also highlight the many other providers that they would typically work with in a factory, right? Again,
Mhm.
I don't think you'll ever deploy Ignition without, first of all, some kind of a hardware vendor, right? Some kind of a PLC, HMI infrastructure, some sensors, right? So I hope that they will add to what they're pulling from the UNS at the conference next week and showcase some creative ways to utilize their partners, which they don't always have the opportunity to do, in the other conferences.
Yeah, I would say on the inductive side, I know that Cirrus Link, Arlen Nipper, the co-creator of MQTT, will be there. So I expect a lot of that play to be on the MQTT connectivity on the Cirrus Link modules as those go and exist. I think I saw on the overview we're going to see on the inductive side, they are going to leverage Snowflake for enterprise-wide dashboards and hybrid cloud analytics. We'll see Ignition Edge, Ignition, and Ignition Cloud Edition when it comes to that in particular. They're going to leverage a Hive MQ, MQTT broker in there. And so I think we'll see one them leveraging core key partners. But I also think maybe the most impressive part, well, Vlad and I'll have to go count, is how many groups are using Ignition as a visualization or as their visualization solution. I would be surprised if it was less than half. And based upon what I'm reading, I would wager half is a good over under when it comes from that. And then on the Tatsoft side, I'm excited to see what they have. I think that they have similar solutions. I'm not sure I've ever seen Tatsoft and inductive automation next to each other or in the same booth or building. So I think that in and of itself will be interesting. I haven't spent a lot of time kind of looking at or working on or playing with Tatsoft since their Framework X release, which was at least 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know what they're up to at the moment. I don't know everything. I imagine that they have a similar tech stack. So it'll be really interesting to me to be able to go look at the one-to-one similarities and differences and who has done a better job showcasing. And so I kind of put Inductive and Tatsoft together in more of a new school providers because they are substantially younger than Siemens and the origins of AVEVA when it comes to that. So that in particular I'm excited to go see. I'm excited to go see how everyone else is using it. I fully expect to be impressed at the booths. We'll also see Opto, we probably won't get to specifically on here, but we'll see Opto 22. They didn't specifically call out using Ignition, but I would almost be surprised if we don't see at least an Ignition Edge license on their Epic Groove or their Groove Epic. Benson, I'm still never going to get that one correct. But no, I imagine that we'll see that in there. I imagine that we'll see many others. And again, I think both of those groups have the ability to easily go from ingesting information to building HMI screens to building your SCADA to building your MES on there. I know several of us have gone and built entire stacks on one and or both of those platforms. So I'm excited to see that, and I'm also excited to see that and compare that to some of the Dave Word only legacy providers as to where that goes. Vlad, we are getting close to running out of time, which is a shocker to all of us that we didn't get through all 35 vendors. Before we go, I want to ask if you want to do the industrial data ops group because I am particularly interested to see them as well. Do we want to do the industrial data ops group, or do we want to say that we will go give some field reports on the HiveByte HiveMQ Litmus side of the conference?
I would be happy to talk about them. I think they certainly will provide interesting solutions, and I'll get a chance to learn a bit more about what they're doing. So, you want to introduce them?
Absolutely. I'm sure I'll be happy to go ahead and introduce them, and then I'll happy to let you go from there. So I'm gonna group the next three, mostly because they self-group under the name Industrial Data Ops. So that is your Litmus Automation, that is your HiveMQ, that is your HiveByte. I have seen them used individually in and amongst and by themselves in instances. I've seen them used all three of them in a tech stack. They all three provide slightly different. They certainly have differentiations. So Litmus, if you guys are long-term viewers of the show, you've seen we've had Vatsal on, we've had Dave McMorrin on. I was at their booth at Hanover a couple of years ago, had a bunch of awesome conversations from that booth. So you guys might be aware of them. They have several, and I know them the best out of the next three, so I'll go ahead and give a brief overview. They have several different applications. So they have Litmus Edge Manager. They have Litmus Edge, which sits, and collects data at the edge, at that PLC, HMI, and below level. Litmus Edge Manager is going to manage many of those. They have Litmus, I think it's just Litmus UNS. I was out there in September. We were talking about it. Parth and Vish, who are their two product managers, I think are the hardest working product managers that I know. I think this is Parth's side. But Litmus UNS is super interesting, especially for the existing Litmus Edge clients. But I'm not going to go butcher what that looks like specifically. And so they've got a variety of offerings, they've got a variety of partnerships that you can see. We've talked about them specifically when it comes to the data collection side. We'll definitely get more in depth as to what that is. Beyond that, HiveMQ, they do several things. The things that I think most people know them for, the things that I know them for, is an MQTT broker. I believe they are providing all of the MQTT brokers for this. They have an entire platform. It gets beyond just an MQTT broker, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. So again, I don't butcher what that looks like. And on the HiveByte side, if you guys like look at where I have written infrastructure, you guys could also draw a similar parallel line with lines to each of those layers. And when I look at HiveByte, I look at it as how can we easily go transfer data across the layers. Now, yeah, that's kind of how I generally look at them. They have added a number of different solutions. They have gone to continue to build, but without, again, going into a 20-minute conversation and stealing all of Vlad's thunder, I look at them as, a major connection. If you are looking to go connect between layers, go have a conversation with the HiveByte folks. We've had a couple of HiveByte folks on in the past. We've had John, whose last name I can't remember, and we had their CTO, whose name I also can't remember. I apologize, guys, on at one point last year. Having said that, Vlad, I don't want to steal all of your thunder. What are your thoughts?
Well, a couple of things, right? So to me, again, like I think this diagram is very important again for us, but as well as for the viewers to visualize. So feel free to kind of edit things as we maybe discuss this. Um, but ultimately, there's a couple of things. So I think HiveMQ, in a very broad sense, it's clear, right? It's going to be the broker. It's going to be what's ultimately allowing you to collect data from MQTT clients and then obviously send it to any consumers, right? So that I think is clear and where it fits. Litmus, for me, I know you've had many conversations with them. We had a couple of conversations with them together. It seems like they have solutions very broadly across the stack, right? So to me, obviously they're not selling hardware. They're not necessarily a PLC or an HMI, but they are living at this maybe SCADA and up layer. I don't know if they actually do any controls. I would assume you can host control applications on top of them, but if not, then maybe that pushes them up into the MES and ERP solutions. Obviously, you've mentioned this earlier. They also provide a cloud solution together with Google. Um, Again, I would assume that a lot of the software can live in the cloud. So I don't know how much of that focus, and I know we had a very intricate diagram, above this one to demonstrate maybe the multi-site capability. But I think that based on your comment on the Edge Manager and what I gather from the Litmus website, their goal is to focus on larger deployments, right? They're not going to be looking maybe at a single facility, although they could, but ultimately it's going to work more for multiple facilities looking to consolidate their data, looking to perhaps normalize what that looks like. And so that's why they have solutions across the stack from edge to the cloud. And I think we're not going to get into the definitions of, what is done at the edge, what is done at the cloud in this conversation, but ultimately there's unique challenges as well as opportunities for these vendors to address. And then last but not least, HiByte, as you mentioned, we had some conversations with them. I know John's last name, which is Harrington, but I do not remember the CTO, to be honest with you. But I remember the conversation, and to be honest with you, I was really surprised with his technical OT knowledge. So I do have a lot of confidence in what they're building. I watched a recent demo of their product where they're showcasing the UI and how they're breaking down and transforming the data. I think it's going to be interesting to see what they build. Once again, my same comment applies to what I've said earlier. I would like to see some legacy to new hardware being connected, because ultimately, if I'm deploying a solution on top of, I guess, current manufacturing components, I don't necessarily have the luxury to update, right? I don't necessarily have the luxury to rip out an entire deployment of an old software or hardware, and therefore I do need to have that translator of protocols. I do need that layer to help me break down the data, maybe change the data. So I really hope that HiByte allows you to do just that. And one comment that I'll also make, I think for all these vendors, I think interactive demos, which you don't always get to see at other trade shows, are hopefully going to be commonplace here. And what I mean by, Dave, by the way, by interactive, it doesn't mean that I press some button and something happens. I
Mhm.
mean, if you're high byte, allow me to come to your booth and to make some changes to the data flows. Allow me to
Mhm.
see what it would take to, again, to my earlier comment, right? If you have a connection to the UNS, what would it take through a high byte? And I don't know if they have this functionality per se, but to translate that data into Modbus or translate that data into a spreadsheet. What does it actually take for an engineering resource to make that happen? And of course, if you're an executive, maybe what does it take to send that data to a dashboard on Ignition or Tatsoft Framework X. So again, I hope to see some maybe hands-on demos that allow you to experience the solution more so than what we've seen at many other trade shows next week.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. Just for the chat in the comments, I looked up HiByte CTO is Aaron Smile, which was episode 169. And again, Aaron, John, I apologize for not remembering the last names in the moment. I was not prepared to go do that, but you guys should absolutely listen to episode 169. That was a ton of fun. I am super interested to go see how this conference looks next week. You guys should absolutely go through the process of staying tuned for that. Yeah, I think we may have a show preview show on Monday. I think we're going to have to see how that goes. We've got a podcast studio that's set up, so we have to go check some technical items to make sure that we've got internet to be able to go live from the show. Assuming we do, we will have a live show at least Wednesday afternoon, normal time, normal place. If we don't, we'll absolutely go through the process of letting anyone know. Vlad, any last thoughts before we go ahead and wrap up?
No, I think it's going to be a very interesting show. I hope that we have enough time to go to each one of these booths. If you are going to be there, make sure to send me or us a message. Definitely looking to schedule some conversations and looking forward to seeing a lot of the people next week in Texas.
Absolutely, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. This has been episode 169 of Manufacturing Hub. If you're not connected to Vlad, if you're not connected to myself, if you're not following along Manufacturing Hub on all of the platforms, please go ahead and do that to make sure that you can stay up to date on everything we're doing. If you guys are listening to this on YouTube or in podcast form, hit that like button, subscribe, follow us along on podcast format, rate us 5 stars, do all of those things so that our beautiful voices can make it into your earbuds every week. Until next time.